Greetings. We're going to call this meeting to order. Apologize for being slightly off schedule. We do have a special session scheduled first, so I'll entertain a motion to go into special session.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Mr. Metzner, seconded by Mr. Brubaker. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. We are going to first consider the approval of an ordinance authorizing the purchase, rehab, and sale of property located at 261 South Potomac Street. I'm sorry, Prospect Street. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move to approve an ordinance authorizing the purchase of property located at 261 South Prospect Street from the city's homeownership program. The acquisition of 261 South Prospect Street is consistent with the Community City Center Plan Catalyst Project Number 8, the city's Housing and Neighborhoods Vision, and the 2015 goals and priorities established by the Mayor and City Council. The proposed purchase price is $76,000 and would be funded with Community Development Block Grant funds.
Second. Any discussion? Motion made by Mr. Metzner, seconded by Mr. Munson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries and the ordinance is approved. The next item is the approval of an ordinance for the development and rental guarantee agreement for student housing project Catalyst number 3.
Mayor, I hereby move that the Mayor and City Council approve an ordinance as amended to enter in the attached development and rental guidance guarantee agreement with Blackwell 2 LLC for a student housing project at 100 North Potomac Street. First model student housing project under Catalyst Project Number 3, USMH expansion support.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Brubaker, seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? Staff want to give some updates,
Yes.
highlights?
Yes, I want to first recognize our partner with the University System of Maryland at Hagerstown, Mark Halsey, and also joining us this evening is Jamie Bouchon and Aaron Harmon.
Welcome.
So a true partnership. We've been working very hard together on this, and we appreciate their support and contribution to the project. At last week's meeting, we presented you with an outline of the agreement. We continued to negotiate the agreement, and I want to summarize some of the changes in the agreement since the last version. First, I want to acknowledge that we do have a signature from the developer on the version of the agreement that is in your packet, as well as acceptance from USMH. And we are awaiting the university's AG office for their stamp or their signature on the document as well, and that is forthcoming. A couple of small changes to the document. I would categorize many of them as structuring the agreement so as to allow the project to have a speed to market, because we are looking at an August 15th move-in date. The first change was looking at setting a date of July 1st for us to evaluate the project timeline and to begin leasing, if we are on timeline target, leasing for an August 15th move-in date. If we did find that there are delays in the project that were unforeseen, we would have an option to reevaluate the move-in date for January 1st, and we would look at the project status on November 15th for leases that would begin January 1st. And this reduces the potential expense for the hotel accommodations if the project is off time schedule as a result of no fault of the developer. We also identified that Exhibit 5 to the agreement, which are lease documents which can be mutually agreed upon at a later date so as to not delay the start of the construction. And those documents would be the actual lease that would be used with the students' move-in, move-out checklist, other types of management guidelines that all three parties would agree upon. We negotiated and evaluated the rent from the original draft at $850 to the $950, which the developer requested in order to make the project meet the expenses, and we looked at a 3% annual increase. And we modified the reporting and payment from one time per year. This would be for the payment by both the city and the university for any shortfall where the rental guarantee would be applied, that those payments would come from the two parties to the developer twice a year versus once a year. And we also did some clarifying language on how the parking would work, that it's more the informing and facilitating the obtaining of a parking permit than providing an actual parking space in terms of what we meant by make available a parking space. So throughout, there were other changes which were more clarifying language. In addition, we added a clause that talked about what would happen with the community legacy grant if the requirements of the grant conflicted with the development plan, and the ability first to seek to modify the development plan and to seek alternatives on financing as a first option, and then a secondary option, but first trying to attempt to approach the project and seek a delayed January 1st move-in date. We do have an update based on some preliminary feedback we've received from Maryland Historic Trust. I'm going to let Kathy talk a little bit about that.
Right,
Lucky you, Kathy.
We, on the 11th, we sent the package to the Maryland Historical Trust once we knew that Patterson was the project that we were pursuing. We sent them the information that they needed to undertake their review. We've run into a bit of an issue with Maryland Historical Trust on the alteration plans. We're pursuing it on two tracks. One is either whether there's some hopefully minor alterations that could be agreed upon by the Maryland Historical Trust to gain a positive conclusion with them, or working through our reps at the Department of Housing and Community Development, possibly reprogram the community legacy funds to another project to allow a shifting over so that we would not have state funds involved in this project.
So that this can move along in a timely way.
Right. And we've been emphasizing that with all of our contacts at the state. The timing is critical with this, as well as the budget is very tight. And
Can you go into just briefly what the issue is with the Maryland Historical Trust?
the building was constructed as a hotel in around the 1870s. The floor plan is still probably exactly the same as it was on the upper floors from 1870, which is of great interest to the Maryland Historical Trust. So we
Yeah.
toured the building with them on Monday. He came to town knowing that this was rather unique from their perspective. They took some pictures, and then they talked with Scott Bowen, the architect, and me about, well, if you are concerned about that, what are some possible ways that we can address your concerns but still allow the project to move forward as it needs to move forward in order for it to provide the 4 student housing apartments. And so that's still in discussions. Today, we reached out to the community legacy reps that we have at the state about whether or not we could shift the community legacy money from this project to another community legacy project in the downtown, and then thus switch some city money over to this, thus taking away the state funding so that we would not have the Maryland Historical Trust
Community legacy is
issue.
about 100,000
Right.
for this project.
So far, those departments have not done anything to act like they're involved with our community though, right? Well, we just had this issue on Prospect Street, didn't we? With the same state agency? You may not be familiar with that, but with the motion we just made, that property, is that the right property? It was owned by the state of Maryland?
I think it's a different one. That's a different Prospect Street property.
Different Prospect Street property, but another issue with a different property owned by the state, who is willing to put it out the bid in a neighborhood that's very vital to us, to just let it go and be converted into apartments.
Did you ask
And
that guy from the Maryland Historical Trust if he would like to stay in one of those rooms in its current condition? Is that what he was so
Well-
excited about?
well, the problems though that we have is, one, if they actually wanted us to keep that building that way, then what they're doing is forcing us to have
Substandard housing.
substandard, it's not even housing,
Right.
it's almost a flop house type situation. I think.
Which we do
I
not
think we
believe is our
need to
community's
speak
legacy.
also clearly, both through our city and through the public and the media, to our delegation and our governor, who got sworn in on a theory that this was going to be a business-friendly state. And so far, the only interactions this municipality has had with this administration is the name of the agency is the Community,
Maryland Historic Trust.
no, the
Community legacy
Community
is through the
legacy,
Department of Housing and Community Development.
Community Development. It's almost when we had the experience we were having with Prospect Street, it sounds like 1984. We're going to give it a name acting like it's community development and then have it do everything but develop our community. So I think we need to put as much pressure as we
I
can.
think what you hear this body saying is, do whatever it takes to move this project along. And if it means reprogramming that community legacy money, it seems like that's going to be the quickest, most efficient way to go. Because I don't see it moving any faster, keeping the Maryland Historic Trust
Yeah,
involved.
I don't either.
I also
Sorry
wanted to
about that
circle-
little aside there,
That's
Jill.
okay.
Continue.
I wanted to circle back on one clarifying point. With the change in rent, we also clarified that included in the rent would be water, sewer, and trash collection. So that cost would not be passed on to the resident, and only it is exclusive of electric utilities and the parking.
Any
We're happy to
questions?
take any questions.
Okay.
3% increase per year. That's maximum? Or is the 3% increase you mentioned?
I believe it's written as a maximum.
That's max, okay. You can't go any more than that
Right.
per year.
Correct, but they're not obligated to it.
And just to clarify for the public, so each student would pay $475 per semester. Is that correct?
Per month.
Per month.
Per
Per
month.
month, yeah, per month, I'm sorry, per month. And plus the electric bill. And they'd have no other financial obligations other than those two things.
Optional utilities like cable or internet.
Okay, optional utilities, okay.
Who would actually have the electric account? Would both students share that account, or would it be in the name of the property owner?
Some details still to be worked out, but it would be
That would be a question I would
an
have.
electric account per apartment and shared by two residents. However, we worked that out in some of the lease documents that would become Exhibit 5.
Okay.
Yeah, we gotta be careful with that.
Any other questions or feedback? It's a great deal. It's very exciting stuff. There's a motion made by Mr. Brubaker, seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. The motion carries, and the agreement is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Look forward to keep working on this. The next item is related. It's the approval of a first third grant application. I think, as you recall, we set aside a certain amount in first third for this particular kind of project.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for the mayor and city council to approve the attached first third grant application for the renovation project at 4 East Franklin Street. The total project cost is $720,303. The first third grant requested amount is $240,077. This grant application and related development plan meets the city's vision for the redevelopment of the city center as established by the city center plan, specifically Catalyst Project 3. Student housing, and is in the compliance with the program guidelines. Staff are authorized to issue a letter of commitment in the amount of $240,077. No funds will be dispersed until staff have verified that all work in the development plan is completed to the city's satisfaction and that a full count detailing the total project cost expenditure requirements has been reviewed. Funding for this grant will come from the general fund reserve.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Metzner, seconded by Mr. Brubaker. Any discussion? Did you want to provide us any?
I'm
You're
for
just here to take
questions.
any
I'm
questions?
just here to take
Okay.
any questions. This is obviously money that's been set aside reserved for a project, and we're just designating this as the project.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries and the grant is approved. Thank you. And the last item for consideration in the special session is the approval of an MOU for the Hagerstown Police Department and the Washington County Free Library.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and council approval to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Washington County Free Library. The MOU will provide a full-time sworn police officer to be assigned to the library to promote a safe environment and to improve relationships between law enforcement officers and the users of the library. The officer will also serve to support other downtown public safety needs in the area of the library to further improve the police presence in the arts and entertainment district. The library agrees to reimburse the city $40,000 annually for the police officer services. Remaining salary costs for the position will be added to the police budget. The position will increase the staffing levels of the police department from 107 to 108, 107, 108 sworn police officers.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Munson, seconded by Mr. Metzner. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries and the memo is approved. Thank you all very much for that. We'll adjourn our special session and move into our work session. First item of which is the review of our preliminary agenda for next week.
Mr. Mayor, can I propose that we change the agenda and maybe move to number 2, since we have invited guests?
I would
and
be
then
happy to do
the
that.
Preliminary agenda?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the Massey project. The staff has provided a memo, Bruce provided a memo of next steps along with a draft of the agreements, contracts, and a plat, subdivision plat. Does anyone have any questions, or staff, do you want to?
Well, if we
Make
could,
any
maybe,
comments?
Mark, if you want to quickly summarize the contracts, they're pretty basic contracts. You've got 2 here, and you might explain the reasoning for the 2. And then if Rodney could come up, he can walk you through some of the property issues, just to get that discussion underway a little bit, just so you're a little bit more familiar with the property.
What I've drafted are 2 separate contracts for the 2 individual lots. One being a little farther east on East Baltimore Street, Lot 2, and Lot 1 there on the former Massey property. The reason for doing that is we're a little concerned, and I want to make sure that we're going to be in a position from a title standpoint that there aren't easements of record that might prohibit or inhibit some of the demolition to those 2 existing structures that are on there. Currently, the title is being searched. We're looking to see what might be of record. There will also be a review internally by staff as to funding that's been used on those properties in the past to see if we'd be inhibited from the demolition on those projects as well. We don't see that same issue on Lot 1, which has the old showroom building, so that's why I've separated it out.
And are there actually 3 lots? I saw on the.
There is,
on the plat, it says it's a 10-foot wide public alley, but I understand that you're not exactly certain about the
That's
status.
debatable. There's some research that we could find that says it's a private alley. The county, obviously, surveyor thought it was a public alley, so I think the title search will have to pan that out a little bit more. If it is a private alley, then that may affect what can be done in there. The piece behind it, which I think is called Lot 3, I'm not sure that can be conveyed to us if that is a private alley, because I'm not sure we can cut it off like they show it, but that'll have to get worked out.
I don't think I had anticipated prior, I hadn't seen the plat prior to doing the contracts, and I just sort of treated it as one side of the entrance to the library.
When it
And-
could be that they're still on the same deed, even though there's 2 different lots, is that correct?
Well, I don't think they are on the same deed. I think the concern, and I guess the reason that the county drawing shows it as a Lot 3, could be the issue of that alley that goes through there. So we're going to need to run that into a corner as well.
It's definitely not a city-maintained improved alley. It's clearly not.
But if we don't get Lot 3, that doesn't really
Right.
limit, I think, what the mayor and council have envisioned. In fact,
Right.
it's a little bit tough for us to use Lot 3,
Yeah, in a
given
way,
the
it's kind of-
configuration.
Kind of tucked back in behind. I don't think not getting that is a bad thing.
Right.
Maybe we could,
Like you
county
say, you
could
just
keep
have
it,
to
or we
run
could
into a
transfer it to
corner.
one of the property owners there. See how it works out.
Like a quick claim situation. Okay. Any questions about the contracts of sale?
Mark, do you want to just mention the 60 days, just once again, make sure Mayor and Council's aware of that?
Well, we do, both contracts have built into them a 60-day feasibility period, a study period, within which, after the contracts are signed, we can still get out of the contract if we find anything in our evaluation that's going to prohibit us from doing what we want to do with the properties. We've actually started our due diligence prior to that 60 days running, so we think we'll be able to run that down pretty quickly.
And of course, the county has not seen this yet because we wanted to get the council's feedback on this before we send it over to the county. So that would be one of the very next steps, is to get these contracts in front of them for their consideration, right?
As far as I know, they haven't seen them yet, or I haven't seen comments back from them yet.
So there could be revisions because Mark hasn't attempted to include some of the language discussed by the county in terms of economic development and conditions, if you want to call it that. Mark hasn't attempted to put that wording
Greg
in.
said they're working.
Well, we have two different lots, though. Lot one, we're gonna have conditions.
Hopefully not, but that's
Hopefully
in
not.
previous
I mean,
discussions with individual
I
council.
specifically brought that up last meeting.
Well, their conditions, though, are in reality a non-condition.
Well, it depends how they're written. you know.
Well, if they're all written to say if we don't comply with the condition, the county gets the property back, it's really a non-condition.
Right.
There's nothing that precludes one of these moving faster than the other, though, right?
Correct. Another benefit of having two separate contracts.
So I guess in layman's terms, you know, let's say we work out this minor, if there are any minor issues with the county, what can the average person expect to understand to be the time frame for demolition of the two structures?
For us to do a demolition contract, the first thing we do is get in the building and make sure there's no asbestos, because that a lot of times changes everything. So the county's already given us permission to do that, so I think next week we'll get in there, be able to quantify that if there is any. Once we know that, we can put together the demolition contract, and I'd say as soon as the land is exchanged and we own it, we could probably move on the demolition.
So all that concurrent with this 60-day period?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Try them down by the summer.
Yeah.
Assuming
As soon as
everything
we own
runs.
it, I think
Yeah.
we would be able.
The other aspect
have
of
a
this is the
contract for it.
community engagement. Obviously, there's interest with the synagogue across the street, but also in the greater neighborhoods. So staff have outlined some action steps related to input from the community. And everybody, I'm assuming, is okay with that.
Yeah, like what's next?
Sort of the visioning for the project. And then, of course, the project budget. My talks with Bruce, that's the area of most concern for staff, is figuring out how to pay for all this. And then, Rodney, you mentioned in terms of the timeline, I think by the summer, within that 60 days.
And I think similar to the development of the bid documents and demolition, we would start working on the RFP for the Lot 1 property as well, thinking that you want to get going on that.
On the competitive negotiated sale process.
Right.
The bidding for that.
Is it reasonable to assume on the lot two that we are looking at a community park, though, is the goal for that?
And that would be helpful, not that we have to resolve all of that
No,
today,
right, but
to know
the big
if it is a
picture.
park, and then what kind of park? Is it a
Right.
memorial park? Is it a recreational park? Is it a park for
Both.
children
Yeah.
with play apparatus?
Well, I mean-
What does the mayor and council envision for that park?
It's an unbudgeted part.
It's unbudgeted, but it also helps Rodney because there's gradation issues there with, you might just explain that there's a drop-off on the property.
As you get further back, the property drops off pretty significantly, more than you would think, maybe about 8 feet from the front to the back. So,
Which isn't a major
No.
hurdle, but it's just one he needs to know as he starts working with neighborhood groups or the synagogue on the design, that kind of thing.
yeah.
But I think the first step there is what the council, well, I don't know whether you want us to do the neighborhood process first and come back, or whether you guys want to tell us what you would envision there, and then we go with the neighborhood meetings.
I had always envisioned that there would be some green space tied into the library, this being a good candidate for it, much like we have for the university and other spaces within downtown.
So when you say green space, you mean
open, more open, not
Yeah, some-
necessarily play equipment or,
I mean, I don't have any
Gardens,
huge
things like
bearing
that.
on play equipment. Yeah, I mean, I think that comes with sort of what's in the vicinity. I think if you're 4 blocks from Bester, you know what I mean, and sort of what's to the left and right, like how far, you know, to get to the next thing. I think University Park functions well without play equipment, so I'm not pressed that that happens right away. And I think part of that comes to the community discussion and what, you know, what the synagogue has an interest in seeing.
But I agree with Kristen. I remember when this whole area was being subdivided and platted out, and I was hoping for more green space between the library and the parking, but that's not the American way. You know, you need to be as close as possible, park your car, and lost that. So an alternative, as it's turning out, almost 10 years down the road, is over here, but it's gonna be a real trick to get people's eye, or to even, you know, have them psychologically conceive that as a place to go and read a book after you've been to the library or something, 'cause it's pretty far by our standards.
Up over the hill.
By our standards, yeah, it's pretty hard. It's, people don't really eyeball it that way or think of it.
I mean,
It's a poor second choice.
I've continued to like that link from here through the 4353 that we bought on Washington, some type of green space associated with the court system, and then linking to the university. I mean, I've continued to think that that is a good path of pedestrian, you know, activity.
And clearly, the synagogue has a theme in mind for the park, but it should be well understood that among that theme is the number one is a community park for the community. So when the synagogue wants to be involved, it's not like the synagogue wants a park for itself. But the theory of a Thomas Kennedy Park ties in with the library, ties in with the history of our community, and to have a tolerance park and something of that nature. And again, that's just the theme. That doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we have play equipment, because it has to be for the community. That's what this park needs to be for.
But maybe what you're asking is, if, let's say, whatever economic development interest materializes for Lot 1, if they need this lot to make parking for theirs, I'm not interested. That's
Right.
just my opinion. So if that's the type of feedback you're looking for me, I'm not interested in having this green space be more parking lot.
Right. Yeah, we would like to see community,
open space.
yes.
Any other thoughts or feelings on
Well,
that?
just to make my views known, I agree with you totally.
So we'll definitely be engaging the community, sure.
Lot 1, I don't know what the competitive negotiated sale process is going to look like, but we've heard all kinds of, I don't know, at least I have heard all kinds of requests for what people think this place could be economically, from you know, a warehouse manufacturing to a grocery store. And all I'm saying is, I don't know how you're gonna write that up, but I would hope that we would include some verbiage within that would provide interested parties the opportunity to see, you know, what the breadth of things are that it can be used for. In other words, not just, hey, here's a building, but hey, here's a space, and here are the various types of uses within this zone that this space can accommodate. So it doesn't keep anybody away.
I think what we do is we ask potential developers to make sure their project is in alignment with our vision for this area of town. And I would assume that if they knew what they were doing, they would be looking at the zoning to see what can go in there.
Well, we would draft an RFP and bring it to the mayor and council to make sure that what's being requested through that document reflects what you would have potentially occurred on Lot 1. So you'll have an opportunity to structure.
Take a bite at that apple.
Take a bite at that apple.
One limitation on that property is gonna be the parking. The best we could figure out is maybe 20 spaces.
In that
That's a
little
big
space
building
to the
for
east
20
there.
spaces. Yeah. Downtown, parking isn't enforced by zoning because you have parking decks and such, but if it was, you'd need a lot more parking than that for some uses.
I guess I just don't want to get pigeonholed, but in the event that an interested party has a retail idea for it that serves the pedestrian activities of 500 or 600 people in that area, that we don't look at a code and go, well, you can't do that because, you know what I mean? Because
you need
it doesn't
100
meet it
parking
because
spaces.
the reality is, 200 folks from Potomac Towers aren't driving across the street.
Right. And my understanding is that
frequently.
we wouldn't enforce the
So,
parking, it's just, there's not a lot there. But
There's not metered parking along Baltimore, is there? There's no meters
Yes.
along that?
Oh, Baltimore? No, not in
That stretch
Baltimore,
right
not in
there?
Baltimore,
Right.
Potomac.
Just curious.
Depending on proposals that we might get, there may be interest in having rear loading areas. Rodney and I talked a little bit about that, access to the rear of the building. It just depends on the proposed use.
which would have to go through the library parking lot. To do that.
It's tight.
So does it make sense that maybe the first step is that we schedule a meeting with the synagogue in the neighborhood to get some input? Is that what we're
makes
hearing in
sense.
We're
terms
gonna
of
send the
what?
stuff to the county.
And we have the location at the synagogue where I'm sure we could do that community meeting.
And then in the meantime,
That would
we'll
be good.
exchange the documents with the county, probably bring the contracts back through Mark with any revisions there. Rodney can start on the demolition documents, and DCED can start on the RFPs or the RFP document for Lot 1. If that makes sense. We'll still, in the course of the budget, need to work on the funding. What we would just say right now is, we're not sure we can use any state or federal funding for this project. We need to clarify that.
Any other questions or?
Just an artist rendition of what you could be, that would be a connection from Baltimore Street to the library, right over here to one of the houses would be coming down.
Very attractive. Sorry, John.
You know, just a quick,
Looks a lot better than what's there now, that's for sure.
Say that again.
Have you got any other thoughts, Rodney, or questions in terms of next steps?
No, I think we know what we need to do.
You know, I'm just, was thinking, looking at that rendering, because there was basically a floral greenhouse there too. Some kind of like a peace garden or tolerance garden, some kind of, maybe an arboretum of some kind.
I've already thought on, and I'm
The
sure, again,
memorial
that's the
garden.
type of thing that you have that private partnership with people who'd be willing to man the gardens and do things like that. So I think we're off to an excellent start.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
I
ladies.
appreciate everybody at the synagogue's involvement too in trying to light the fire under the feet of people to get something done here.
Oh, no, you keep it.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Let's go ahead and dispense with our preliminary agenda review. So, Mr. Munson, you have the invocation next week. And just to review our meeting schedule for April, we will not have a meeting on Tuesday, the 7th. We will have work sessions on the 14th and the 21st. Our regular session at 7 PM on the 28th. We do have several appointments to boards and commissions scheduled for next week. There's a correction on the appointments under the Community Development Block Grant Public Service Review Committee. Those people should be William Godwin, term to expire on April 1st, 2016, Lawrence Maynard, and Todd Morin. So I think there was an error on the first go-around. I don't know if you've all received the corrected one yet. The consent agenda has street closures for 2 additional runs and consultant services for public access channel. Any comments or questions on those 2 items for DCED? Parks and Engineering has a surveying robotic instrument. Is this for the alleys, Rodney?
No, this is just general surveying.
Oh,
land
okay,
surveying.
okay. Any questions on that one? And then HPD has approval of a crime intel software. Any questions on that? All right, so no questions on the consent agenda. We have two items for unfinished business, the amendments to Chapter 216 and the amendments to Chapter 60. Any thoughts on those, or?
Questions, we've dealt with both of those before. New business, we have the amendments to Chapter 33 we discussed last week, the Code of Ethics. We have 3 summer camps, items B, C, and D. Any questions on those? We have the grant agreement with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for a recreation grant. Any questions on that item?
It's a $10,000 grant, what's no match requirement? Or no,
That's-
cash match requirement.
That's a really nice one. The next item is the MOU with the HPD and the DEA. Any questions on that? Item G is the approval of the ARC funding request for 2016. I believe we're talking about those tonight. Item H, the approval of the livable streets policy and design guidelines we talked about last week. Any questions on that? Item I, the approval of transfer of HPD vehicle to the First Hose Company. Item J, the approval of the extension of the annual financial single audit contract for 1 year with SB and Company. Any questions on that? Item K, the approval of the employee benefits consultant and broker with CBIZ. Any questions on that?
Item L, the approval of an employee vision provider. Item M, the approval of an employee life and long-term disability insurance. Any questions on those? Last but not least, the approval of a contract for the Safe Routes to Schools for Bester. Any questions on that? All right, thanks for that.
Okay, let's talk about broadband.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity to bring this back to you. Just a little quick recap. Back in December, we distributed a request for information to several vendors gauging interest on the potential for a broadband implementation and expansion in our city center area. That RFI included 5 goals that we were looking to get information back on. The first would be the establishment of a gigabit or greater speed fiber network in city center that would foster innovation, drive job creation, and stimulate economic growth. The second goal was to provide free wireless access in several of our city parks, including City Park, Pangbourne, Helene, Wheaton, and Fairgrounds Park. The third goal was expansion of wired and wireless access to areas beyond city center to include residential areas, business parks, and other commercial areas within the city. The fourth goal was to provide connectivity to enhance and expand our camera surveillance system with the police department. And the fifth goal was to establish a technology presence in city center in the form of a co-location facility where technology companies could come together with their communications equipment, and also a business entity that would operate out of a city center location that would provide internet service for the community. We received back 8 responses. 7 of those were from implementation companies. One of those responses was from a consultant
who expressed, who basically validated what we were looking to do as far as these goals were concerned. I have a synopsis here of the responses, just some highlights of the responses that I can provide to you also. If any of you'd be interested in looking at the entire response from some of these vendors, I have those I can email those to you as well. The responses that we got leaned more towards a situation where public-private partnerships would be created. It would also involve working with various vendors. One of the companies that actually has, two of the companies that have fiber coming through City Center, one of those is Antietam Cable, the other is Windstream. Windstream would look to utilize some of their fiber, the fiber strands that come through the city, and work with their hardware vendors and some of their internet service providers to come up with an LLC type of an operation for City Center that would be in charge of managing the broadband implementation as well as expanding that as it went on. Wide Open Networks is a subsidiary of the group that did the needs assessment for the county, Design 9, and Andrew Cohill was here. They also looked at a public-private partnership where they would use what they call a demand aggregation model, which is instead of building a network to a certain specification and hoping they're able to fill that, to fill that network up, they would look at demand and market demand to a specific area and then build the network to that with the ability to expand it as more services came on. That helps to eliminate some of the financial risks that would be involved. It would make it more inviting to some investors that might want to participate because they would know that there would be less of a financial risk, but also an opportunity to expand as the demand would increase. Insight Solutions, which is a subsidiary of Gannett, which is the USA Today parent firm, would also look to do a consortium approach, which is they have their group of companies that work with them that would come into town and do a market analysis, would scale their network accordingly to the demand that they would also see, and then work within their consortium to provide services to the city. Antietam Cable would look to use their fiber that they have coming through City Center. They would also potentially use what they call an Ethernet fiber overlay that would be redundant to what they call their hybrid fiber coax, which is what runs their cable modem technology. They would also be willing to absorb fiber connection charges for any new or relocated businesses in the defined area, which was interesting to read as well. The last company, Sci-Fi Networks of America, would look to utilize what they have trademarked as their Fiber City approach. It is also basically a consortium type of an effort, where they would come in and gauge demand within the target area and then build their network using their partners and as associated contacts in the industry to work with them on building this network. CTC Technology is a pretty well-known consulting firm that has worked with Westminster, Maryland, and helped them implement their fiber network there, where they are now expanding into a business park in Westminster and have gotten a lot of press lately as far as what they're able to offer to businesses, and have active economic development relocation going on there to those areas that have fiber connectivity. They've expressed interest in working with us to potentially help develop the strategies. I don't believe they'd be an implementation firm, but they would certainly have the contacts to be able to work with us if we decide to work with them on a kind of a consultant basis. So I was happy with the response. I did hear from several companies through email that said as much as they would love to respond to an RFI, they would rather wait and see what the RFP would involve, and the RFI, obviously, they're not gonna give away the farm on an RFI, some of these companies. So there was like a, put an RFP together and then we'll give you the keys to the kingdom kind of response. So there was definitely interest out there. In the context of all this, which is really the second part of what I wanted to talk to everyone about, was contacted by a group called Next Century Cities, and that is a association of about 60-plus cities that are interested in expanding municipal broadband as an economic development tool in underserved areas. Members include Westminster, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Lafayette, Louisiana, Bristol, Virginia, those cities that have really been at the forefront of the municipal broadband effort. Was contacted by them, and what I have in your packet was information that they provide as far as the principles of what they believe a municipal project should encompass. Those include a commitment by the community that high-speed internet is necessary infrastructure, the ability to provide fast, reliable, and affordable internet at globally competitive speeds. And I think that's the important piece here, is that we need as days move on, we need to stay competitive with our surrounding region. Areas that are getting the big economic development relocations, West Virginia, up into Pennsylvania, that have the ability to offer fast, reliable internet, are going to get those type of opportunities. The internet is nonpartisan. It's an essential resource for residents and businesses in all communities. The collaboration with Next Century Cities is a nonpartisan association. It accepts leaders of all affiliations and who believe in fast, reliable, and affordable high-speed internet. The communities must enjoy self-determination. Broadband solutions must align with community needs. There is no perfect model that is universally appropriate. Towns and cities should have the right to consider all options, whether public, nonprofit, corporate, or some other hybrid free from interference. High-speed internet is a community-wide endeavor where building effective next-generation networks requires cooperation amongst communities, which would mean involving all facets of the community, whether it be nonprofit groups, citizens, businesses, large and small, and community officials, to be able to come up with a service that fits everyone's needs and is able to expand. Meaningful competition drives progress. A vibrant, diverse marketplace with transparency in offerings, pricings, and policies will spur innovation, increase investment, and lower prices. Communities, residents, and businesses should have a meaningful choice in providers. Collaboration benefits all. Innovative approaches to broadband deployment present diverse challenges and opportunities to communities and regions. Working together, cities can learn from the experiences of others, lower costs, and make the best use of next-generation networks. Membership into this group is simply an email from the mayor that would basically state, you as a body agrees with these principles and would like to be part of the organization. There's no charge to join. It does open up a vast resource of like-minded municipalities that we would be able to utilize as we would move forward with whatever path we take to be able to provide high-speed internet to our community. So that would be the second thing, just some sort of a yeah.
Yes.
Right, right.
It can only help.
Right.
On the website, you have some pretty impressive cities that are involved
Right.
in this.
Okay, so we'll get that ready for next week then.
And then the next steps is, from the way I see it, is once we, talk with Next Century Cities, we can also, I've also talked with a couple consultants as far as what they thought whether we needed a consultant to move forward to try to develop a good plan. What I've heard back was most of those that we would look to use as consultants wouldn't do it because they would want to participate in the RFP process. That's where perhaps something like an Next Century Cities type of a contact group would be great in helping draft an RFP and be able to throw ideas off of.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to reinvent everything.
No,
With this-
no, there'd be no reason to because
And
there's
glean all
such.
those best practices from other communities you've done.
Right, right. So that would be another resource to be able to do. I'd look to do, something like that over the next 2 or 3 months, and then look to start crafting an RFP in the summer with distribution mid to late summer, and then see where we go from there.
Thank you very much for all your work on this. I would be interested, if you want to send me the email.
Sure.
I'd be interested in reading all those responses.
Sure.
And I do think Scott's comments in reference to let's take some time to learn from Next Century Cities is important. Consider our process here, because we're dealing with new technology. We're dealing with a lot of customer service issues, some complexities that go beyond our abilities. If you think of what we did with the cable franchise, where we're dealing with a single entity, not the competitive environment we could have here, we relied pretty heavily on consultants to help us develop the franchise agreement on cable with a company we've had a lot of history with. So I think we just need to be thorough on this, take some time to make sure we've got people that are giving us good guidance, because this is new for the staff here. And I mean, we've all talked about broadband. I think Scott, more than anybody on staff, has a good general understanding of it. But when it comes to bringing it into your community, having a contract, positioning it for future service, residential, commercial, there's some real issues there.
And Next Century Cities, you have cities as small as 5,000, you have cities, upwards of 1 million people. So we do get we would get a good range, and there would also be, I'm sure there'd be some opportunity out there for a consultant that would want to come in that I would know others would trust to come in and work with us, and help us draft something.
Thanks, Scott. This, I know for you, this has been a labor of love, but I'm emphasizing the word labor. You've put a lot of effort into this. And I personally feel that this particular effort has the potential to bring real jobs into Hagerstown, Maryland. And I think it's a great way to go. These will be good jobs.
Mr. Brubaker.
Scott, you mentioned a little bit ago staying competitive with communities, and you mentioned valley communities. You mentioned Pennsylvania and West Virginia. It's probably likely that a lot of communities on the other side of the mountains, east of the mountains, are ahead of us in some of these things. How are we competing with cities and counties up and down the valley?
Well,
In your
I'm not economic development.
No. I meant in broadband.
In
I don't
broadband?
mean in economic development. I mean in broadband.
We are an underserved area. The Appalachian Regional Commission will tell you, and we're in that area that shows that we are an underserved technology area.
By we, you mean Washington County and Hagerstown, or do you mean the valley?
No, the valley, and the valley and mostly
Well,
into western
tri-state area.
Maryland, yeah, and probably it stops at Carroll County, Carroll and Howard County. Westminster, of course, with their initiative, has drawn certainly ahead of us and a lot of communities in the area, in their ability to provide high-speed broadband at a very affordable price. Still, that there are still remaining areas where in this area that still operate off of modems, off of the old dial-up modems. In our case, we are 100 megabit at this point predominant infrastructure here, which is cable modems. Most companies use them. Most residents use cable modems in this area. That provides a technology in itself that would be adequate for many, but there's also that area of the population that's not adequate for, that would be looking to go higher. I would tend to argue that it would be tough to attract a high-tech company into the area if you did not have the capability to provide them gigabit or higher speed broadband. Those areas that have attracted those type of companies are doing that.
Well, I think we ought to have plans for doing this before we put any proposals for the central lot out. I mean, that's the kind of company I would like to see attract. And I think we can offer some things that some metro areas can't, but we gotta have the basics. So I would like to tie those together somehow. No.
That's true.
And I understand there is dark fiber running through the city, but it's a matter of getting that fiber lit up and
Yeah, we have, there are.
Marketed.
Two of the companies, Windstream and Antietam Cable, do have fiber coming through town. The other companies that do, the Entelos, Zios, they will work with some of these with wide open networks and the Insight solutions. They'll work with them as a way, as part of the deal of trying to get fiber back to a service provider or to the internet. So there are those connections. Those connections are ones that we could never do because we wouldn't provide them the return that they would be looking for if we tried to do that ourselves. And by no means do we, the city, want to get into the management of any type of internet network. That would just be insane to do that. Yeah.
Scott, you mentioned Westminster and its very affordable rates. What kind of, do you happen to know off the top of your head what rates dollars you're talking about?
I don't, but they rival for gigabit access. They rival that for cable modem access, which is 10 times. Fiber can be at a gigabit speed. Is 10 times that of what cable modem, even the highest speed cable modem, 100 megabit is. Fiber is also dedicated, which means if all of us here at this table had fiber, we all get a gigabit of speed. All of us here are utilizing or on the same circuit as a cable modem, then I might, when I get up in the morning, I might get 100 megabit, but when Councilman Brubaker comes home and turns on his Xbox and starts playing a game, he takes a little bit of it, right? Where this is all going is the streaming capabilities of what's being offered, the Netflix, the Hulus, the Amazon Primes, that are taking up large amounts of bandwidth to be able to see high definition through a network connection. The more of those you get, of those type of users you get, the slower your network's going to be, and the need for more additional broadband additional bandwidth to be provisioned.
All right. So we'll have the resolution to support these next Century City principles, and then we'll look forward to the RFP sometime after you have a chance to do some more homework, and around the summertime, you said, we'll look for a
I would hope
draft
so by that
RFP.
time. Yeah.
Okay,
We're coming into the 21st century, aren't we?
Kicking and screaming.
that's right. Okay, thank you very much. All right, come on up. Land Management Code amendments.
All right, get your coffee. Hello, Steve and I are here to tell you about Land Management Code package that's been forwarded to you from the Planning Commission. We spent the last 9 months reviewing what we were referring to as the 2014 package of amendments with the commission. They had their hearing on the 28th. On the 11th of this month, they forwarded this package to you. Steve and I are going to give you a briefer version of the PowerPoint than what we would do at the public hearing, just hitting on the highlights. But we've divided it up into 3 categories for ease of review. One is the revision to the Historic District Commission's hardship provisions. The next is an overhaul to the city's sign or graphics regulations. And then miscellaneous amendments covering a wide variety of issues for various parts of the city. And Steve is going to start us off with the HDC hardship provisions changes.
One issue that's come forward, obviously very prominently in the community in the last couple of years, is the revitalization of downtown. And within the Historic District Commission, that also created discussion of how that would impact their role and what constructive role they can play in it, because there's a tendency to perceive them as a barrier versus an active participant. And we worked with them to come up with some provisions that would allow them to be more of a constructive participant in the revitalization process rather than a perceived roadblock. The provisions in our ordinances discuss a certificate of hardship process where one of the possible criteria for getting or having a structure demolished for hardship is that it's not in the benefit of the majority of the persons in the community, and this is an extremely vague concept. So we worked out some expansion of that language within the ordinance that allows a process to be set up within this, where if the city identifies a project in our downtown core, subject to the HDC's jurisdiction, that if the city feels that a contributing resource, meaning a B or C resource in the historic district, may need to be sacrificed in order for the greater good, essentially, a business or a development that would be a driver of economic development in the downtown, that the HDC can proactively participate in the process where the building possibly may come down, and the demolition itself would be included in the development review process. Essentially, it would move demolition to being something that if the city administration believes is truly a important economic driver for the downtown, that a recommendation can be made, and then the HDC can move forward as if the building would be coming down. There would be processes set up in policy statements or in design guideline, the HDC's design guidelines, that would create a balance where the process would be set up where it would need to go through the review process, the typical review process of the design of the new building, construction plan review for the replacement building, and then the demolition at the very end as part of the building permit process would be essentially a formality. Basically, this gives, because the HDC guidance and in how we can move forward with economic development with them being a more constructive participant in the process. Initially, the HDC, we worked with a committee of a couple members of the HDC and us as staff to come up with these proposals. This is actually a somewhat pared back proposal based on guideline or guidance from the city attorney's office. What we identify as these balances to make sure that we don't unnecessarily lose historic resources, that certain procedures be put into place, and city attorney advised that that's best handled as a policy document or actually to be put in the design guidelines, which this body would adopt. We would be looking forward to come to those, with those to you in the near future as this moves forward. But initially, the balance was set up specifically within this proposal, but it's being kind of separated into two separate elements. Also, there are other provisions, for example, are demolition ordered by the chief code official. There are times where we may have a building in our historic district where they are an imminent safety hazard or threat to the community, and the chief code official orders the building down at the earliest possible moment. We have proposals here that would take that out of the HDC's realm, and they would, however, the treatment of the property or anything left standing, because it's a change subject to typical HDC review, the treatment of the property after the demolition would still be subject to HDC approval. But some building that's a imminent threat shouldn't have to wait for the HDC process in order to get approvals to come down. And if a building is truly that far gone, HDC is going to approve it anyway. So, but that is the thrust of the proposal, is basically for the HDC to become more of a constructive player in the economic redevelopment of downtown rather than a perceived barrier.
And to provide a lot more guidance on what those hardships are that are in the ordinance now that just have no direction for the HDC on how you would actually administer it. things not being in the best interest of the majority of the citizens.
That's
So just to
extremely.
be clear, the process would remain with the HDC. At one point, we had talked about certain types of projects coming to the mayor and council. That's not the recommendation here. The process would stay with the HDC with some revised language in the code.
With a recommendation from staff, the city administrator or his designee, such as economic development staff, that this is a bona fide economic development project, meeting the criteria that would be adopted by this body.
And then they may choose to agree or not agree with that evaluation from the staff or determination from the staff.
Ultimately, the law says that it's their decision to make. However, as a practical matter, if there's a recommendation coming forward from the city administrator's office or his designee, they're going to take that very seriously in the process. It does protect our most historic resources. All of the buildings in the historic district are on a rating system, A through F, E or F. And the most historic buildings, the ones that are rated A, are not subject to this provision, but frankly, the vast majority of those A resources are buildings that you'd never think would be party to this anyway. City Hall is an A, Maryland Theater's an A, the churches are As. They're building.
Firehouses.
I'm sorry?
The firehouses.
The firehouses, the buildings, all of the vast majority of the A resources are ones that nobody would even begin to think about knocking down to do something with, so.
Do you have any questions about this section, rather than having you wait to the very end? Okay. And the next section has to do with graphics. We've done a lot of changes with the proposed changes to the sign regulations. They're motivated by complaints that we received over certain types of signs that are being used, observations that some of the sign provisions are too constraining in some situations, the desire to make the graphics provisions easier to understand, and a desire to provide consistency between different parts of the city code that deal with signs. There's the land management code that has the sign regulations for what we refer to as on-premise. You know, here's your McDonald's and here's your McDonald's sign. There's another part of the city code that deals with billboards. Well, the billboards chapter also has some regulations that deal with, say, you know, McDonald's type of sign. And so we're making sure that we have consistency between both those chapters with the ultimate intent in the future when we take a look at the billboard chapter of just having that chapter only deal with billboards. And all the language that's in there now that deals with on-premise signs would just be in the land management code. So right now with this, we're also making that consistent, what's in there. Just touching on some of the highlights, one of the areas we get complaints about are temporary signs, signs that are plastered all over the place. We've added a new list of what are permitted temporary signs, such as construction signs, real estate, political signs, grand opening signs, things like that. Any other type of sign that's not on that list, we prohibited, and the people would have 180 days to remove them to be compliant with the ordinance. So that would be a new thing for us. Window graphics would be in the Historic District area, would be subject to design review of the Historic District Commission. Right now, only window graphics on the outside of the glass are reviewed. So as long as you put it on the inside of the glass, you can go crazy with window graphics. And this is an example of some fairly excessive window graphics that we have. So this would say, whether it's on the glass, on the outside, or on the inside, it should be reviewed by the Historic District Commission.
I like how you fuzzied out the faces on the pictures.
It's from Google. The next is, in terms of flexibility, we're permitting sandwich board signs for street-level businesses under certain conditions. Right now, the regulations are silent about sandwich board signs, but it's fairly common desire in the downtown area to have them, and so we're saying that that would be something that would be permissible, again, under certain conditions. Exempting certain types of signs from the maximum square footage for signs, window graphics, and I'll touch on this later. The Planning Commission staff diverged on this one a bit, but anyway, window graphics would not be counted towards the maximum sign area that you could have for a business. Wall-mounted directory graphics, that's when you put a sign, you know, about 12 square feet by the door that lists the tenants that are in the building. We wouldn't take that out from the maximum square footage. And then theater marquee signs in the downtown area. We decided rather than trying to figure out what's an appropriate size, because these tend to be fairly sizable, particularly if you look at old photos, they're big. So we said, rather than pick a size, we'll just say they would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis by the Historic District Commission, rather than saying no more than 20 square feet, just, you know, whatever seems appropriate, case by case. Again, providing more flexibility. providing more flexibility for commercial building-mounted signs. The regs that we have now, in some ways, are a little constrictive, saying have a certain type of formula, and you can only have one sign. We're making it a bit of a looser formula and saying, we don't care how many signs you have, as long as it stays within the cap of the square footage, rather than saying, you can have one 32-square-foot sign, you could have a couple that are smaller, it's up to you, but we're saying it now would be based on the square footage requirement, rather than saying just one. Institutional freestanding signs, typically this is churches and schools and residential areas. If the building is set back more than 25 feet from the street, given a larger sign area, typically in that environment, there won't be things close by either, where a big sign might be intrusive. Usually it's on a very large lawn. Non-conforming signs, trying to bring non-conforming freestanding signs into conformity when you have multiple businesses on one sign, it's very difficult. So we added a process to allow for graduated conformity, so that, if you have 3 signs, which is an example we had on the Dill Highway, if one of them wants to change, but, that it's too much square footage and it's too tall, and rather than saying, sorry, you gotta wait until everybody else is ready to change, if you're bringing yours closer, and everybody who changes after you finally brings it down to conformity, then we're good, and that allows the businesses to turn over or change or whatever and not be penalized because there's 2 other guys in the sign that don't want to change. And then the final, Steve is going to talk about this one,
Which is,
the miscellaneous.
okay. With miscellaneous package, basically, this is everything that did not fit into the 2 previous categories. Some of this is generated by policy direction coming forward through various administrative efforts and mayor and council efforts for redevelopment, et cetera. Also, some of them are corrections of minor errors here and there throughout the ordinance. And what I'd like to do is just go over a few of them for you. I'm not going to belabor all of them. One
Well,
is.
It should be important to make known that we're providing clarity for administration as well as flexibility for desired uses, but also more protections for the quality of life in our neighborhoods and our commercial districts. These are motivating factors for what's in this miscellaneous package.
The very first one is actually the only correction or change to Article 2 of the ordinance, which would expand the range of the pool that we have for potential candidates for the Historic District Commission. In order to serve on a Historic District Commission, you have to meet certain professional criteria or qualifications in order to serve. And we find that sometimes, given the very technical nature of some of those, sometimes it's difficult to fill vacancies on the HDC. Currently, all of the members of the HDC have to live within the city. That's actually not required by state law, so we're proposing that 5 of the 7 members live in the city, and that will allow 2 members of the commission to be non-residents of the city and allow us to cast a somewhat wider net for potential candidates for service.
Should work for the PowerPoint,
Okay.
so it's not too confusing for folks.
Okay. The bail bonds and probation and parole offices, this is a use that we've identified as should be removed from the CCMU zoning district. There are other districts that it would still be permitted in, but if this is passed, bail bonds and probation and parole offices would no new probation or parole office or bail bonds would be allowed in the CCMU. Hookah lounges, vapor lounges, and tobacco shops would be added as a permitted use in the CCMU, CG, and CR. Check cashing services would be added to the CG and CR, but not be permitted in the CCMU.
There's also a 500-foot separation on the hookah.
Yes. Regarding other protection items, there would be a requirement that work be conducted in a professional and workmanlike manner. We've been run into some examples of work that was produced on projects that for example, they incorporated things like tarps as roofs and things like that. Technically, they fell under the provisions for requiring building permits, so we're kind of closing a bit of a hole there. Dumpsters enclosures, we would require any new dumpster enclosure added to existing development if substantially visible from public streets. What happens is a property gets developed, And let's say business is really good in a particular business and they generate more trash than they anticipated, so they want to bring in another dumpster. Sometimes they back up the residential areas, et cetera, or they're visible from public ways. But there's nothing in our ordinance that requires, because dumpster is something that's transitory, technically doesn't require recapturing the ability to require screening for those. So if they're visible, substantially visible from a public street, then we would require that a enclosure go in. Expansion of nonconforming uses, we found a bit of a administrative issue regarding the expansion of nonconforming uses. We would like to close essentially a small loophole in that we want to identify that the expansion of a nonconforming use, whether it's a building or a use of land, that it's limited to the 35% for that area. In other words, you can only expand a building 35%, a use of land 35, up to 35%. This came up because of an issue of someone applying to the Board of Zoning Appeals for an expansion of a nonconforming use. They used the entire area of the nonconformity, which had indoor and outdoor uses, for a building expansion. And it went to the BZA, and the BZA said there's technically nothing in the ordinance that says we cannot entertain this, so we're closing that loophole. Also, there's a provision that's proposed that we have some of the most accommodating nonconforming use provisions around as far as how you can continue them, how you can change them. We have a provision that allows you to change a nonconforming use to another as long as it's it's less of an impact than the one that it's replacing. But there are certain uses that our thought is that nobody should be allowed to apply to insert into an area as a changed nonconforming use. And that list is here on the screen. It'd be adult entertainment businesses, bonding, probation, and parole offices, drinking places, homeless shelters, hookah or vapor lounges, kennels, sale of fireworks, tattoo parlors, transitional housing for persons being treated with substance abuse issues. The vast majority of our nonconforming use issues are in residential areas, commercial properties and residential areas. And I always like to explain through the use of example. Let's use the Valencia building on North Potomac Street, or excuse me, on Potomac Avenue. That is a commercial building, it's a nonconforming use. Perhaps that use will go away someday and somebody will want to put another use in there. This would prohibit any of these uses from being proposed for a change of nonconforming use, so using that as an example. Other miscellaneous amendments for protection would be open space for multifamily development. Right now, if you have a multifamily development that is not a subdivision, that it's just coming in as a site plan of development, we don't have any, technically don't have any open space codified requirements. We do in subdivisions. If you're creating a subdivision and it's over a certain amount of units, density-wise, there is codified requirements for open space, not so for site plans. So we're looking to close that hole and require certain open space for multifamily developments coming in on site plans. Sidewalks, right now, our ordinance does not specifically require that places that don't have sidewalks along public streets, when they're in for a site plan, to provide sidewalks. We do require that when somebody's creating a subdivision and you're creating streets and you're improving the streets, we do require them to be built in subdivisions, but no such requirement at the site plan stage. So we do lean on this to be achieved, but technically there's nothing in our ordinance that specifically requires it, and we're looking to close that hole so we can have a bit more leverage, fill the gaps and have more leverage in compelling it. This is within the subdivision and land development ordinance. The way that ordinance is set up, somebody can apply to the planning commission for a waiver. So if there's something particularly unique and peculiar about a property where maybe putting in the sidewalk is just not practical for whatever reason, the planning commission does have the ability to waive it, but at least the structure will be set up where we, absent something unique, we expect you to put the sidewalk in. Fences between residential and non-residential uses, this was brought up with the concrete plant down on Noland Avenue. There was an adjacent property owner who wanted to screen their property. I believe the cement company actually was willing to put the fence up, but because they were in a residential district, there was a height limitation of 6 feet. However, the property immediately next door was industrial and was allowed to have a higher fence, and we're talking a distance of this. So what this does is it allows properties in residential districts that are adjacent to commercial or industrial districts the benefit of the same fence height limitation that would be on the adjacent commercial or residential property. Excuse me, commercial or industrial property. But
So
it's,
So if the concrete plant can put up a 10-foot fence to screen themselves from the house should be able to put up a 10-foot fence to screen themselves from the concrete plant.
exactly. And it would only be when you're adjacent to that non-residential zoning district. Artist Live Workspace adds, this is a permissible use in the IR and the IMU in older buildings. We made some adjustments also to light manufacturing. We added retail bakeries and confectionaries to the retail and wholesale trade category, just as a clarification item, because technically, we refer to what's called the North American Industrial Classification System, NAICS, for similar uses within our ordinance. It's not binding, but it's a referral. But believe it or not, bakeries and confectionaries, although we think of them as a retail operation, technically aren't. So we're just making it
Technically manufacturing.
technically manufacturing. So we, basically, we're just clarifying that we're treating them as retail and wholesale in the purposes of our ordinance.
When it is a retail bakery and not a large-scale bakery factory.
We also add brew pubs to the drinking places use category. And then here's one that bears a little bit of explanation. Within our residential zoning districts that do not permit apartments, we add multifamily dwellings constructed for that purpose prior to October 1st, 1956, which was the first adopted zoning ordinance in the city. The reason for this is that there's a number of apartments, buildings and apartment complexes located throughout the city in the RMOD and RMED zoning district, which are by definition now non-conforming uses. It makes it difficult for them to get improvement loans or financing for sale. So this would allow for those apartment buildings that were built prior to the adoption of our zoning ordinance, would now be by definition permitted uses, and that will free them up a bit for improvement and for transitioning ownership. To give you some examples, the apartment complex that's across the street from First Christian Church on Potomac Avenue, that's in a district that does not allow apartment buildings. Also along Hamilton Boulevard, there are a number of apartment buildings that were built 100 years ago as apartment buildings, but
Yeah, and
technically
they
they're
could
now
not be
non-conforming.
converted to single-family or two-family, which would be their option if they sat vacant for 2 years. So it just doesn't make sense. And we did a search on Google to see just where I basically looked for large roofs. And we have about 26 of these buildings outside the downtown area, scattered around in the residential areas or adjacent to some of the commercial areas. This would just put them in a better situation for, as Steve said, financing to keep them up.
Can you go back to the drinking places, brew pubs thing for a second? So, item Q prohibits the BZA, I'm looking on the memo here, page 4. Prohibits the BZA from approving certain uses for changes to non-conforming uses, adult entertainment, bail bonds, drinking places. So are drinking places allowed in the Center City Mixed Use District?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, just wanted to.
Yeah.
But if they're in a zone where they're not permitted, they wouldn't be allowed to expand
They would not be allowed
if they're
to go
already a
in as a new
non-conforming
use.
use. Right,
To
okay.
change the non-conforming use.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
For example, Valencia could not become a drinking place
Right.
or brew pub. Also, there's a couple of minor changes to the forest conservation ordinance that is proposed, and this is to bring our ordinance actually into compliance with changes recently made in the state law. There was a while back where we actually had to take out the exemption to the ordinance based on existing paved surface. We've had that out of our ordinance for a few years. Well, the state decided that it was probably not, and we did that to reflect the state law. We took it out of ours. Well, they put it back in theirs, realizing it was a mistake, so we're looking to put it back into ours as well. Also, a couple other items associated with stream bank restoration, et cetera, being exempted. Do you want to go into the public input ones?
And then there's a few changes that have been added based on the public input the planning commission received during their hearing process and the 10-day period that the record was left open. One was to allow retail and wholesale trade in the industrial general district as a special exception, as we allow in the industrial restricted district, provided it falls, there's no more than 25% of the building is used as retail or wholesale trade, which is what we approved, I guess, last year. or in the 2013 amendments in the IR, which was at a request of a developer. So now, again, it's been brought up that this would be nice for the IG as well, so we said, all right, as long as it's the same process as for the IR, a special exception, and you can't exceed 25% of the building in this type of use. Another request was pawn shops to allow them in the IR and the IG, and we decided, the planning commission decided that seems reasonable, but to do it as a special exception, which means the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that it also be in the same category as retail and wholesale trade, so that a building could not be occupied more than 25% by retail, wholesale trade, or pawn shop. Next one, specialty trade contractors, that's like plumbers, electricians, folks like that, to allow them with, if all of their operation is indoors, to allow them in the CG, the Central General Commercial District, and then if they have outdoor storage, prepping, lay-down areas, to allow them in the IMU, IR, and IG district. Right now, in the industrial districts, they're sort of interpreted as being similar to offices or something like that. This would specifically spell them out as permitted in the industrial districts, and then also if everything's indoors in the commercial general district. And then the sunset period for plan unit developments, if you don't start construction on a plan unit development within 2 years, you lose your PUD. And so it was requested that we expand that to 3 years and also suspend the clock on that time if, for some reason, the PUD approval has been appealed and has gone to court. And so this would say, yes, now the sunset period for PUDs is 3 years, but if someone has appealed the approval, we won't start that clock until the appeal has concluded. And then finally, what we have for you, there was about 5 issues that staff had recommended that did not gain the majority support from the Planning Commission. And since one of them was one we presented to you last fall as something that was being explored, I figured we would present them all to you. The first being the storefront protection zone idea, which was to require storefronts in a certain portion of the CCMU to be occupied by high pedestrian traffic uses, such as retail, restaurants, things of that nature, and to require lower pedestrian traffic uses like offices to be located on either upper floors or uses that are, or spaces that are not in a storefront. The photograph you see gives you an idea of what we're trying to achieve. The left is some other community in the state that shows storefronts with lively activity, a lot of pedestrian traffic. On the right is actually a Hagerstown example on West Washington Street where a storefront space has become a state office, and you can't actually even see into the space anymore. And we were just lucky with that photo, but you can see it's not drawing a lot of pedestrian traffic. So that was what we were trying to achieve. This was debated at length by the Planning Commission. We received some negative feedback in the public review process, and so by 4-3, it was very close. The Planning Commission decided not to support this. So we just wanted to.
What do you think about that, Councilmember Brubaker?
Well, I support the concept, but I think what carried the day was that it would be a disincentive to certain kinds of investment, that it was too inflexible, it's too difficult to try to shoehorn storefronts into some of the buildings. I'm giving the arguments against it. I do agree that it's important to try to keep us from having long block fronts where there's nothing happening. And while I could see modifying it or trying to make it work better, I can't see getting rid of the concept altogether. The vote was 4-2, by the way. I abstained.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Well, and just as an example where I think we're trying to change things, if you think of North Potomac, we used to have Bickles, a bridal shop, and Hoffman's Clothing. Now we're going to have a counseling services and a storefront church there. So our downtown's changing in a way that we'd like to reverse in terms of some of the retail foot generation, traffic generation. And so I think we would like to revisit the whole storefront topic with the mayor and council, just to be sure that what we're doing is consistent with what your goals are, the community city center plan we worked on with urban partners, some of those kind of issues.
And the commission felt that the goal behind this was good, but they thought carrots were more appropriate than sticks, that incentives should be how to be accomplished. staff expressed that we felt that with the state of our downtown, that both would be appropriate. And the city does have a lot of incentives, which we
We
explained.
sure do.
But we felt at this point that both would be appropriate.
The other thing that I think is important about this, and I support it, I think we should look at these storefront protection measures, was something I thought of when I was on the planning commission, which is that we're very good about saying what we don't want. And in this concept, we're actually putting out a list of things that we are encouraging to be located in the downtown. So it's an incentive in that way of saying, look, these are the things that we want to be in our downtown, because it, again, is about creating pedestrian traffic and keeping the street alive and not putting in uses that aren't going to be generating.
I do believe there was a waiver provision in there. Was there not a waiver provision? I don't remember, we had such a long discussion.
There were certain types of buildings that would be exempted, like single-user institutional buildings, which is like government buildings.
Or school.
Libraries,
Right.
schools, and then single-user auditorium buildings, which is theaters, churches, and then buildings that never had a storefront, and there are some of those downtown, or no longer have a storefront because of changes that occurred in the
Yeah,
past.
well, if it's a consensus of the council, that language can be brought to us, that it was proposed.
The example that you use, isn't that a single-user governmental office?
Which one?
The one on the square, right?
One on your picture.
No,
That,
that's on,
It would be now.
West Washington
It wasn't
Street.
before, yeah.
But it is now. Yeah, I mean, I read that one too. I agree the goal's good. I don't find that we've reached the point of the sort of right language yet. You know what I mean? I just think of what we have doesn't say clearly enough what we want in a manner that isn't going to experience unintended consequences. They're just, the buildings are so varied and in size and scope and style and accessibility and I understand what we're trying to do, I'm just not certain that.
but I think in certain cases, it's pretty obvious, like if you look at the building in the picture where the state of Maryland has, that was obviously not built to be an office building. It was built to have retail space. That's what the whole purpose of those big windows are, so you can show off the wares that you have and to show off whatever activity you have going on inside, but it's pretty clear when you paper it all up like that, or you completely cover it up, that that it's not going to achieve that goal. It's not fulfilling the intended purpose of the building. And weren't buildings actually designed in terms of if you knew what kind of building it was based on which way the gables were facing back in the day? That was something that I understood, like,
That's interesting, I've never heard that.
you haven't heard, well,
Check that out, would you? That's
Yeah.
history.
yeah.
This one here
But in
that
other
doesn't
words-
care too much for those
I love
buildings.
history, but I don't think it
No,
should.
I'm talking buildings, okay.
Yeah, I mean, but they were built to be commercial storefronts, and that's how you create an active pedestrian corridor and streetscape, and I think,
Right. I think the main thing is making sure it's as fair and implementable and
Sure.
doable as possible.
well, we don't have to solve that tonight.
Right.
If there's, a majority who would like to explore this, then we'll certainly put it back on the agenda, in the near future.
If you can write it in a manner that I can sit there and go, yeah, that can be applied consistently, I'd be fine, but I just read it and I just don't, I'm trying to apply it consistently and there's a dozen different buildings I can think of off the top of my head that, I could put a use in there and go, yeah, that use is perfectly compatible with that building and doesn't meet, you know what I mean, the limitation within the parameters that this specific item says.
And we were thinking we'd try to come back on April work sessions to give mayor and council more time to work on these issues, because we're throwing a lot at you here, I think, today. It is an important opportunity. I think the other one I wanted to make sure that we focus on, Kathy, is the issues that came up with the Change Health location downtown, to make sure that what we're doing here addresses mayor and council's goals in that regard, as well as the storefront legislation and maybe some of the other issues as well. But we want to make sure that we're not overlooking something, because this is a good opportunity as we amend these to try to address some of those goals. So, Mayor, I mean, you can let us know tonight if there's issues beyond these, or we can come back in April.
Yeah, I think the plan was to maybe put this on for the 14th or the following week. 14th would be fairly limited, but just to give folks time to digest some of these changes and maybe have dialogue with staff about.
That would be helpful if you have suggestions or areas you really want us to focus on to bring back in April. Kathy, you're suggesting a public hearing on the 28th in April, correct?
Yeah, but if we need more time to discuss this concept, that's fine. I will not be here for the 2 work sessions in April. And I'm sure my staff will say, Kathy is a storefront protection zone person.
That's fine.
We'll work around
Yeah, there's no need to
Yeah.
rush.
There's no
Yeah.
firm schedule that has to be followed, is what
No,
you're saying.
no, it does not, the hearing does not have to be at the end of April. If we need more time, we can take more time.
But I think this is a good project for us all to work on.
Yeah, I
It's
think,
important to take enough time to do it right.
right, the planning commission took 9 months. The least we could do is take a month and really
Sure.
study it and
That's what we're trying to say, there's no big
make
rush.
careful
Right.
consideration.
Yeah.
And there's a few other things that just wanted to highlight. We had suggested that window signs, and there's a picture up on the screen, should be included in the maximum square footage requirements for a business, which is how Washington County handles it, and I've since found out is how the city of Frederick handles it. And our planning commission did not agree with that, and so they have become, they would remain exempt from the maximum square footage requirements. And we thought that was something that should be addressed, since a lot of other people seem to treat it that way.
Just, again, I support what the staff is trying to do, although I think shaping it a little bit more. But at least I want it to be us to be at least as restrictive as the county. That's unusual for it to be the other way around, as I recall.
What is the-
But I have to say, when you look at pictures of different places, there's some that have full window graphics that look better than others
Right.
that have.
Well, I think it
that-
depends
that
on
meet
how
our
far it's set
requirements.
back from the
So it's-
street.
It's a lot trickier than you might think. And
Well,
that's
what was-
a
what
lot
was-
of people were looking at a lot of pictures.
What
and
was
saying,
identified as the issue with window graphics? Just that it
That we
becomes too
should be
cluttered,
more-
or?
we should- Well, the concern was clutter, which is what brought staff to it, and a lot of other communities seem to feel it's a problem as well, which is why they put restrictions on it. Our commission felt that we should be more flexible and allow folks to have whatever window signs that they wanted to have to help promote their business.
And part of the issue with window signage, if taken to the extreme, you get into a situation where you end up losing your storefronts because the business owner is more interested in using that glass
As advertising.
as advertising versus advertising their product through people looking through the window and seeing product there or seeing a beehive of activity within the space.
But this particular picture, I mean, set farther back off the road. I mean, you might be walking by on the sidewalk, but generally you're driving by at 35 miles per hour. And this would not be as concerning to me as the storefront protection stuff in the downtown. You know, whatever happened to the days
Array
of,
pictures that make it, it's not quite as simple as.
well, I mean, back in the day, people painted signs on the buildings, "You need a biscuit," and all these other things. I mean, that's just sort of how you knew where to get stuff. So, I mean, you know.
That example that you gave us, that would come out of the maximum square footage requirements,
Would
but it's
it?
not on the glass.
Okay.
They banned puns specifically.
No punny signs anymore?
Yeah, no, you need a biscuit.
And then there were 3 more. One was that we felt that if you're going to put a dumpster on existing property, that any of them should be screened as we require for new development. And the commission agreed to the idea if they were substantially visible from the public way, but they did not agree to requiring any that were put on the site to be screened. We suggested that would be appropriate because in some cases, if they're not visible from the public way, they're probably quite visible from the residential properties behind the property. But that was one the commission did not agree with. We had, as staff, recommended not allowing hookah lounges in the CCMU, but having them restricted to the commercial general and the commercial regional district. The commission did not agree with that. And then finally, BZA written decisions, staff had proposed that either staff or the city attorney write the decisions that the commission had come to from their meeting for review, revision, and approval by the Board of Zoning Appeals, just as a way to make sure that all the important points that brought up in the hearing make it into the decision, that helps the applicant understand what was approved or not approved, and helps staff then in the future enforce something if the decision had not been adhered to. It was widely not appreciated by the city attorney, the Board of Zoning Appeals themselves, or the Planning Commission, so that's not in there.
So
And
how
was
does it work
surprising-
currently? The
The
chair
member-
writes the
The
opinion?
members of the BZA themselves write the decisions. And we did a study of a large number of jurisdictions around the state. We even looked into some outside of the state, but then pulled them out of our study. And the only other jurisdiction that we can find where the members of the Board of Zoning Appeals themselves write their own decisions is the Baltimore County Board of Zoning Appeals, which is actually a part-time job held by zoning and land use attorneys.
That's the most atypical thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, the vast majority, what we found is that staff writes routine BZA decisions. Anything that involves an appeal, and again, I place myself in this situation because I'm the zoning administrator. If I am appealed, obviously, it would be a conflict of interest for me to write the decision in order in a case I'm a party to. So in that case, the city attorney would need to step in and be the person writing it. But the vast majority of jurisdictions, it's the planning staff, when your variances, your special exceptions, et cetera, are the ones writing them for the BZA to review.
And currently, they don't even consult staff, or staff doesn't even give them a draft, or?
They take the file with them the night of the hearing, and a couple weeks later, we get the file back with a written decision and order. We have no participation in the process.
And this is one I think is a no-brainer. I think it needs to be professional. It says BZA review, revision, and approval. It would
Yes.
go to them and say,
Right.
no, that's not quite what we meant, or I disagree
Right.
with the way you put that. That's entirely legitimate. But to have the basic framework professionally crafted, I think is something.
We would provide them the draft. Obviously, it's
Yeah.
completely within their right and purview to adjust it as they see fit. So,
Okay.
So maybe May, I guess, when we get back with Kathy's schedule. But we can come back to mayor and council at work sessions and.
And we can always have a hearing on a work session day, right? We don't have to have those on a fourth Tuesday.
at the 7 o'clock meeting.
Okay, would need to be during a regular session. Couldn't do a special session.
Well, we'd like to use the 7 o'clock because there's a stronger chance that the members of
Citizen
the public that
comments.
would like to be there
Okay.
wouldn't have to take off work to come to the hearing.
I think on something like that. We've got a lot of feedback at the planning board hearing, and some of it was constructive, and we incorporated in some of it. A lot of it was constructive, and that we could agree with. We incorporated it into the language, as you saw earlier. So I think it's.
Well, I appreciate staff and the planning commission taking so much time and working on these things. Yes,
I have
Mr.
a couple of
Alshire.
comments. The first is, the HDC stuff, item D where it says development that is significant pedestrian traffic generator. If it's a major economic development opportunity, I don't see that it has to be tied to the primary purpose of being a pedestrian traffic generator. For me, if it's a major economic development opportunity in downtown, then it's just that. So I, just my 2 cents, I'd recommend removing that part. And then under miscellaneous amendments, I'm not in favor of expanding the PUD sunset period, tying it to the appeals, because I think that leaves it subject to an indefinite period. I'm fine with expanding it some length, but not indefinitely, as that language suggests. And then G, I would only be in favor of 2 voting members of the HDC being non-residents if they have some connection to the city. In other words, if they've got a business within the city or something, just, you know, there has to be something that I think ties that membership to the activities that their function is related to. And then under L, it says that allows residential properties which abut non-residential districts to have higher side and rear yard fences. I would change that to uses instead of districts, because I think you may find in some cases there's going to be residential structures next to a non-residential use in the same district that may
But they wouldn't be able to have the 10-foot fence themselves
I
if they were in
understand
a
that.
residential district.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm just thinking of some residential properties that abut non-residential uses that clearly have a desire to have some fence protective measure from that
We would need to be
use.
careful how we use the term non-residential use. There's probably numerous non-conforming uses around town where I completely see your point.
I understand.
But it, for example, non-residential use could be a public school, it could be a church. Then the question is if, you know, would we want somebody to be able to have a 8 or 10 foot tall fence when they are up against a church or a school? So,
Yeah, I don't have any opposition to that. And then under R, removes the requirement for RV parking for apartment buildings in the downtown. I just wanted to note that there's a second RV now at that laundromat next to the Herald Mail that seems to be parked permanently. So that was just a side note.
I will take a look at that.
And this is a requirement for RV parking
And our parking.
in apartment buildings?
For new construction.
Yeah. Parking.
It's the citywide
Strange.
requirement, it just doesn't make sense for downtown.
Very strange.
And then, under your, what I'll call planning commission non-recommendations, I agree with you on number 2, the window graphics. I think that should be included. I definitely agree with you on dumpster enclosures. And I actually scratched that out before I got to it, where you have it under L, because there's language at the end that says, if the dumpster is substantially visible from a public street. I think that it should be put in place. And then on number 4, hookah lounges, I have some ideas about that particular one, just as I do on number 1. I think that there should be something included within these updates about hookah lounges.
Wasn't it 500-foot spacing on it?
I would like to explore the conversation on that particular item about smoking within establishments in general within the city, which I think addresses that in a more direct manner. And then the last thing I'll mention is we seem to have a pop-up of what I would call unregulated rooming and boarding houses within our residential districts around the city, and I don't see any changes in language to address that.
Boarding houses are not permitted in our ordinance, so if somebody's popped one up, it's a zoning violation. We would, if once we're made aware of them, we'll investigate them and pursue them accordingly.
Okay.
Any other comments or feedback based on what we have here? I would encourage everyone to continue the dialogue with staff if you're digging down into this and have any other questions or concerns, and then
And
it'll
we'll
be back on
include
our agenda.
These comments from Councilman Elshire in the memo for the next discussion, so that these points can be discussed.
And the BZA stuff, right?
All right. Well, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the ARC funding request for 2016. Thanks for your patience, Alex.
Thank you, and good evening, and I'll try to make it as succinct as possible. This is the Appalachian Regional Commission ARC funding request for FY16. Tri-County Council asks for requests from counties, municipalities every year, and the due date in the county due date is April 2nd for us to submit projects to them. Once we submit projects to them, the county commissioners will take our projects and other projects submitted within the county, rank and prioritize, and then send them on to Tri-County Council for their review. Just a brief overview on ARC. It's, for Washington County projects, it's 50-50 match, and the individual requests cannot exceed $500,000 per project. Staff got together, we reviewed the RC requirements, and this year we're proposing 4 projects. The first one is the high-speed broadband initiative, which Scott talked about earlier. We'll be looking for $20,000 in ARC funding with a $20,000 city match. The next project is wastewater collection system rehabilitation, addressing inflow and infiltration issues in the sewer system. We had this on for last year as well, and ARC requests 200,000 with a 200,000 city match. The third one is downtown building renovation for student housing, basically a continuation of the efforts that we're already taking now with student housing, implementing that catalyst project for the community city center plan. So we would look at a total project cost of about $1.2 million, ARC requests of $300,000, with matched by the city, $250,000, $500,000 from a private, and then $150,000 through other non-federal grants, because that's actually a requirement of the ARC program. You can match with other grants, but just not federal. And then the last one is the City Center Business Attraction Retail Restaurant Incentive Program. Basically, this is a building on the success of the pop-up movement, trying to make pop-ups more permanent, and working with those to rehabilitate spaces and getting them into a more permanent spot in downtown. And the ARC request would be $50,000 with a $50,000 city match. And so what I'm looking for from this body tonight would be authorization to submit these 4 projects to the county for their consideration, as well as a ranking of which ones this body feels is a priority, or if they're all number ones, that's.
I suggest we make number 3, the downtown building renovation. Leverages the most money. It's trying to get a fair share for, a good share for the city. It would offset money that might otherwise come out of the general fund. And I'm wary of including the others. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm wary of including the others. I'll go into
Wary
it.
of including the others? In other words, just suggest one project?
Yeah, one
I
project,
think-
push hard on.
I think number 1 and 4, if push came to shove, we could cover that, you know, ourselves through our incentive programs. We've identified number 3 for me is.
And number 2 is an ongoing effort of our, that, you know, we're funding through increases in, you know, that's within the water and sewer fund. And
Okay. Does everyone agree that number 3 is the city's priority?
No problem.
Any objections? All right.
So it's the top priority and the only one.
And the only
Yes,
one.
so when I draft the motion sheet for next week, it will only have student housing on it.
Sounds like that's the will of the council. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
The last one is really a housekeeping item. It seems to be really a mistake in the city code. So it would, instead of requiring, what, a 2/3 majority of boards and commissions, it would be a simple majority for them to conduct their business. Does anyone have any objection to that?
No.
Okay.
That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm exhausted. The city attorney said he could have the ordinance ready for next week if you were, wanted to make the change.
yeah, I think
Okay.
it's critical.
Yeah.
Let's do
Okay,
it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the city administrator's comments.
None from me this evening.
All right. Council comments. Mr. Metzner.
I'll pass.
Ms. Nye.
The only thing that I want, and Bruce, if you would please check into this, we have the bulk appliances that are setting out. And of course, it's always, we don't know where they're coming from. Well, there's 2 TVs on East Avenue, and they, in fact, are the huge TVs. And I would say that they are coming from the place where they are setting in front of. But I think that we need clarification on this, because I'm really tired of people jerking the city around as picking up what they don't want that's coming out of these places now.
Okay. Mr. Brubaker?
Yes, Lou and Mayor, you're excused. You heard some of this last night. I'll try to do it really quick. I said that last night. But at MML, an update of where we are 2/3 of the way through the legislative session on the priorities, highway user revenues. The governor added 19 million in a supplemental budget, as you all know, and that meant, after everything else, just a slight increase over what we got this year. However, in committee action last week, 3.4 million was taken out of that because Baltimore and Howard counties don't have any municipalities. That's still going back and forth. So I think there's a good chance it'll be restored, but that's part of the maneuvering, and that would knock that proportionally that amount out. The planning legislation that would keep in the hands of the legislative body, the council, the ability to change master plans and change it in detail, that's going well. It's been passed by both the House and the Senate, and anticipate that will go through. Financial disclosure, reducing the requirements for certain boards and commissions in order to encourage more people to volunteer. That is not going well. It did not get through. Got an unfavorable committee report. Just say the word ethics, and it's hard to get around it. Those are the MML priorities. In terms of other items, real quick, there's a public there's a movement to drastically increase the requirements we'd have to meet for public information in 4 or 5 different ways. That's been scaled back much closer to the way it is now. I've worked with Donna. We work with the City Clerks Association and others, and I think it's not going to be nearly as damaging as what was proposed, but it will be a little stricter. Financially, it may not be as bad as some of the procedural requirements, such as getting a response within 10 working days and things like that. And finally, there is a sort of a ringer, a surprise movement that came out of College Park to reduce to as low as 5% the number of voters that would have to approve an amendment to the charter, or taking it to referendum. That's because of College Park still has people that graduated from Maryland 10 years ago on their voter rolls. It's a local issue. Somehow it's gotten statewide traction. Hopefully that will revert back to a local issue, because it really means that we'd be going to a referendum style of government.
When
if
it's
it got
only
too low.
if the local governing body chooses to make that amendment. There's nothing that forces you to
it could
put
go-
that provision in the charter. It's the way I read it.
It could.
No, the way I read it, it's if the local governing body decides to change that part of the charter to change the referendum, but it's not a mandate, as far as I read it.
Okay. Well, at any rate,
Checking into
that's an
it,
issue that we'll double check on that. And so those are the things that are there. Oh, and one more thing, there's the 50 bill, we looked at probably 2 or 3 times that many, but the 50 bills and/or joint bills that we took a position on, took stands on, are in the MML website. You can follow them. Just go to the homepage, the Legislative Advocacy Bill Position Summary, then you can click, get the actual bill. You can get the fiscal notes, which is where a lot of the real information is. They lag, frankly, a week or so behind in terms of where they stand, and sometimes it's hard to find the amendments in them. But you can go on and look at the 50 and look at what the MML positions were that the committee took. And that's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that lengthy.
No worries. Mr. Alshire?
Couple of things. I've received a good bit of feedback already on this downtown dorm project with the university, and all of it's been good. I know that there was an editorial in the paper about it, but I think that there's been some real sincere positive feedback, and from a lot of folks that actually are outside of the city, just see it as a good positive step forward. So it's good to hear that. Also, I've been working on this trash issue a little more, and I got some pictures and some notes that I'd like to share with you at some point on the issue. I think it gives you a visual perspective. Staff brought up, and Lou brought up a good point tonight about the Maryland Historic Trust. We're doing a lot downtown that I think is going to impact
demolition of buildings and changing character of buildings and changing character of spaces. And whether it's the Prospect Street issue or the corner of Washington or the building for the downtown dorms or the Massey property, it seems like that is a piece of the conversation that we cringe a bit at the hurdles associated with it. And I would only echo Lou's comment that I think we need to have some broader conversation with the Maryland Historic Trust, maybe the Department of Planning and the governor's administration as an elected body to those officials, because staff can only do so much. And so, when you're pushing paper sort of back and forth between staff and agencies, I don't think that it echoes the level of conversation that I think we want and that we want. So if there's any issue out there, with this new administration where I could put a finger on and say, hey, we need to talk about item X, to me, it's that item, because I think that they need to get a perspective of what our bigger picture is and the amount of flexibility that's frankly going to require of the Historic Trust as we improve the community. The last item is, yesterday evening I was walking and there was a significant or an elevated level of domestic altercation on the walk coming from the inside of one of the homes, and there's a gentleman that came out of his apartment from the first floor, and then a lady on the other half of the half a double, and so I called it in, and I take this approach that your community, your neighborhood is, only going to be impacted to the degree of that stuff that you allow to occur. And as the police showed up, I think within 2 minutes, I thought to myself, some folks probably think that that's a bother to call on those issues, but I think it is a preventative measure that keeps those facets of your neighborhood safe and positive. And, we frankly, we pay a lot of very qualified fine officers, a good wage to do that exact thing. And I think that they welcome those types of calls. And we hear from the chief all the time, if you have an issue, call us, because I think that it's much better to be preventative than reactive.
It's a responsibility of being a good neighbor.
And so I could tell the guy on the bottom floor that didn't want to get involved in the altercation was appreciative that somebody had stopped and phoned it in, because probably living there thinking, I don't want to call it in and be the nasty neighbor, and moments later, it was a young individual that was having an altercation with the parent, and the parent clearly did not have the ability to console the situation. So it was a good result.
Thanks. Mr. Munson.
I'd just like to thank Marty for spending so much time in Annapolis and keeping us informed of what's happening down there. Obviously, from my viewpoint, a lot of things happen that impact us greatly, and it's not an easy trip. It's not an easy task keeping informed of 50 or 100 bills that affect us. So thank you, Marty.
I'd like to begin by thanking the council for a good discussion this afternoon, moving forward with the process for finding a new city administrator. I think it was so far it's been a good process, and it's going pretty smoothly, so I appreciate everyone's efforts on that end. And just a few notes about some upcoming events. This Thursday is the opening night for the Maryland International Film Festival, happening right here in downtown Hagerstown, so I hope everybody checks that out. And on Friday, we have a grand opening for the Zephyra, I'm not sure still how to pronounce that, the sports bar next to Flying Pie on South Potomac Street, 49 South Potomac Street. Also that evening is the Art in Bloom preview party at the Museum of Fine Arts. There's a whole lot of stuff going on this weekend. The Adoption Center and the Spay Neuter Clinic is going to be opening and being dedicated on Saturday afternoon. The YMCA Achievers Annual Banquet is Saturday night. And on Sunday, the ARC is having a Let's Get Out walk And and that's to recognize National Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month, and I think that's happening at Pangbourne Park, if I'm not mistaken. And that's 11 o'clock on Sunday. So, that's all I got. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.